Hello, friends. Tattooed Biker here with you, and welcome back to Freakish Fridays. I know it's been a while, but tonight I have 3 true Bigfoot encounter stories submitted by viewers, and I'm excited to relate these harrowing tales. So without further delay, grab your boots and let's ride to Sasquatch country. Dear Biker, I had an experience with Bigfoot when I was much younger. And let me preface this by saying that I didn't remember this incident until I was in my early 30s. It came back to me about over a week in bits and pieces. I think it was triggered by my brother, who came to live with us. After a few days of little snippets and memories popping into my head, out of nowhere I finally talked to him about it. He told me it was all too real, although he didn't know what happened to me until then. He put 2 and 2 together and shared his side of the story, which made me realize that I wasn't crazy or just imagining things. I grew up on a ranch near the Wind River Mountains in Wyoming. We heated a house with wood, so every year after the crops were in, before we had to start irrigating, we would spend about 2 weeks in the mountains getting wood. We always went to the same place that we called Bear Trap on the Big Sandy River. It was fairly remote because it was long and difficult to drive into the place. The only people I ever saw there besides my family were sheep herders on horseback. I should also add that I love the outdoors, and we spend most of our weekends either in the desert or in the mountains. I love them both. But for the desert, I'm much more comfortable there. I don't sleep well, if at all, in the mountains. I'm always on edge. For as long as I can remember, I've not been able to go creek fishing without someone else nearby. Preferably in sight, and now I know why. I think I was about 5 years old or so. My brother was 12. We'd been camping for about a week, and Mom and Dad went down the mountain or something and left my brother and me up there. It sounds crazy nowadays. I remember standing there, watching them drive off next to my brother, who had a .22 rifle propped on his shoulder. After they left, I went to play at my favorite spot, by a creek which is just out of sight from the camp, which was probably about 200 yards away. I don't know what my brother was doing at that moment, but this is what I can remember. I do recall being carried by something, with long, thin fur under its arm, kind of like a football. There were at least 3 other beings alongside us, traveling both upright and all fours, intermittently and screaming, yelling at the one who had me. It was like they were telling it to put me down, and it was wrong to take me. They all seemed to be in a panic. I don't remember smelling anything. It almost feels like I was watching it happen to someone else. I don't recall any emotions at all. It was almost like I was a passive observer. It doesn't make sense now because I know I'd been terrified. I do remember that I didn't like the loud, chaotic noises, though. I don't know how far we went, but eventually we came to a place that was an overhang, or a cave. The dirt in front of it had been swept clean. The ones running along beside us had reddish-brown fur and long arms and seemed like they were about teenager age and a little younger. They continued to squawk and yell in protest until a much larger one came into view. Then they all went silent and out of sight for some reason. I had the impression that she was the matriarch of the bunch. She grunted something at the one holding me, and I was put down on the ground, and then it left too. I didn't feel like she was mean or meant to hurt me, just very sad. I wonder if maybe she had lost her own child, and they snatched me out of grief. The older female looked at me kindly and had a soothing presence. Her fur was darker, almost black and much thinner. I don't remember if she made any sounds or not, but I feel like she continually communicated to me that I was safe and I shouldn't worry. She took me by the hand and led me to a bed-like thing made out of pine needles, grass, and soft bark, which was right at the inside edge of the cave. She indicated that I should sit there and she was very gentle with me. Then she disappeared for a short time and came back with some plants and water and had me drink it and then gently laid me on the mat. The next thing I remember was waking up, first smelling a damp, mossy earth smell, then feeling the grass tickling my nose. I was very confused as to why I'd take a nap right there. I was about 20 feet away from where I'd been playing. I walked into the camp and my brother grabbed me and hugged me, and then yelled at me for hiding from him. In retrospect, he was absolutely frantic. After I told my brother my side of the story, he told me that he'd been looking for me for hours, and that he had checked the area where I'd been playing several times. He also told me that Grandpa and Dad were aware that these things lived around here, but they had never bothered us. He and my dad used to leave them salt and sugar on a log every year, and they took it every time. I was unable to talk to my dad and my grandpa about it after I remembered because by then they had both passed away. When I was young, I never told my mom about it either. I did hear my grandpa telling my dad about hearing something come up the creek while he was fishing once, and it was no bear. But they stopped talking about it when they realized that I was listening. Thanks for reading. Signed, Anonymous. Number 2. Dear Tattooed Biker, I have a story that I'd like to share. I had recently divorced and decided to clear my head with a canoe camping trip. I planned to camp out for a few days and then be picked up by my brother 12 miles downriver. This normally would have been an easy, leisurely trip, but my canoe would have been retired years ago. I drove out to my launch point, locked up my truck, unloaded the canoe, and took off, knowing I would hit some small rapids a couple miles downriver. When I did reach the rapids, my canoe started taking on water. Between trying to bail water and navigate the rapids, my canoe overturned, and I was carried downstream. All I know is that shortly after overturning, I blacked out. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I came to, I felt something pulling on the shoulders of my life jacket. My vision was still blurry as I looked up into the face of a very hairy person. When I reached up to touch my head, it came back all bloody, and my left ankle felt stabbing pain with every jostle. The hairy person pulled me to shore and left me alone under a tree. I wasn't scared of this hairy person because it seemed clear that it meant me no harm, but because I was right in the middle of grizzly and cougar country, badly injured with no way to protect myself, I started calling weakly for help, shivering and moaning in pain. It wasn't long before the hairy person appeared again, carrying a spear-like branch, and several others. I didn't have the strength to sit up, and my body felt like it was slipping into warm slumber. I heard some loud splashes all around me, and a fragrant smell reminiscent of Honey Nut Cheerios came up around me. I also heard a sound near my head, like that of a splat ball hitting the floor, and then a strong odor that wafted toward me that made it clear what they were doing. They were marking their territory. The warm fog of sleep finally overtook me, and I slept. When I woke up, the Honey Nut Cheerios smell was replaced with a small ammonia odor. The fragrant territory marker by my head wasn't the only one. There were similar markers surrounding me. As well near me was a small fire and a pile of wood, a pile of berries, and a crude clay bowl filled with water. Several hours must have passed because night had fallen, and the forest behind me was dark. I was cared for, but alone. I was battered and exhausted, but I knew that I needed to stay alert that night. I could hear movement in the forest behind me. A cougar appeared. It came closer, but didn't try to get much closer than about 10 yards. A bear appeared later, and it sniffed the air and then turned away as well. The behavior of the wildlife made it clear that the territory markers were for my protection, and I made sure to stay within that area through the night. I took short sleeping breaks throughout the evening, trying to rest as much as I could. When I awoke around dawn the next day, I saw my sleeping bag and backpack next to me. The sleeping bag was dry, and the stuff sack, but my backpack was wet. I had some non-perishable food and a first aid kit in there that were still good for use, so I got busy cleaning my wounds and eating a granola bar. I felt I had some of my strength back, but I needed to ration my food before I tried to hike back out with my swollen and purple ankle. As the sun rose higher in the sky, one of these hairy humans appeared and looked at the gear surrounding me. This time I was alert, and I got a good close look at my caretaker. This one looked to be a male, and while it fit the description of what people called Bigfoot, I can't bring myself to call them by this name. These hairy humans were clearly intelligent, and to call them Bigfoot, the great North American ape, felt like an insult to this intelligence. His eyes settled on my knife, and he gestured toward it. I handed it to him, and he turned it over in his massive hands, looking at it closely. He stopped looking and handed the knife back to me, but I pushed it back towards him. I wanted him to have it. Considering the spear the other one had, I figured it would be useful to him. Out in the forest, the one with the spear returned and started speaking in quick, deep-sounding utterances to my caretaker. They locked eyes with me and pointed upriver. I looked in that direction and pointed that way as well, and they grunted at me when I turned back to them. They were already striding back to the forest, and then they were gone. I was sitting in the fragrant circle for a while, waiting to see if they might return. Then I heard voices coming from the river. Before I could gather the strength to stand, people in an inflatable raft came into view. I yelled for help. I yelled that I was hurt, pointing to my head and ankle. They quickly paddled to shore, loaded me into their raft, and I left my gear behind during my extraction trip. My rescuers asked me about what happened. I told them everything, except for the hairy humans. It was crazy enough that they saw me sitting along territory piles. I didn't want them to think that I'd completely lost my mind. I know my experience was unique compared to what other people have experienced with these hairy humans. Maybe the group I encountered was a more advanced group of so-called Bigfoot. But to me, they will always be just hairy humans. They rescued me from the river, fed me and kept me warm, and they even protected me in their strange way. If that doesn't make them more human than beast, I don't know what will. Signed, Deandra. Number 3. Dear Biker, when I was about 7 years old, my family took a trip to South Dakota to see Mount Rushmore. We got a cabin in the very back of the property, for the one we reserved wasn't available. The family that had reserved the cabin before us had extended their stay, so we had to take the only one left available. When my dad went inside the office, I went with him. I'm a total daddy's girl and followed him everywhere, while the rest of my family stayed out in the van. When we went up to the desk and were told that the cabin we originally reserved was still occupied, we were offered another one at a very discounted rate. When the clerk said this, a man beside him threw up his eyebrows and looked nervous. My dad jokingly asked him if it was haunted or something, and was met with another nervous look. My dad didn't really care about this type of thing. We got to the cabin and everything was fine at first. The only thing I really remember was that there were huge footprints going away from the front of the cabin deep in the mud. My dad put his size 12 foot up next to them, and they were at least 4 inches longer than his. We noted how strange it was, and then went inside. Over the next few days, some strange things happened. Like once we came back from an outing, and all the cereal boxes we had bought were out on the front lawn. Another strange thing was when we came back from the pool, all of our shoes were in the bathtub with the water running over them. Both of these times there were no signs of a break-in. I'd been having strange dreams while I was there also. I had never had any dreams like this before, so I don't believe that's what they were, and they were the same each time. I would wake up, feeling watched, and in the window facing the woods, I would see a huge, dark figure in the window, watching me. It would never leave when I saw it. It just seemed to be interested in watching me. Now to the reason I'm writing. Sorry for the long intro, but I feel it was important to note all of the above. I went on my own to explore, as I had done several times before, and found some sprinklers set up on a hillside. I was running and playing in them for quite some time when I heard a loud crack from the woods on the other side of this hill I was playing on. It piqued my interest, since it sounded as if a tree fell, but I didn't see any disturbance that would point to one falling. I walked into the tree line and was there for quite a while, and heard some very strange things. There were things that I could only equate to very heavy footfall, but never saw anything that might cause them. I'd been wandering around for a long time, trying to find my way back out, and was getting more and more frightened as I went. I would see trees rattle and shake like something was jumping from tree to tree, following me through the woods. I started to lose hope that I would ever find my way out. I sat down on a rock and had started to cry when I heard the same heavy footfall approach me, and then stop several feet behind me. I looked up and stared in the direction they came from before I saw it. It had to have been only 10 feet from me, staring directly into my eyes. He was at least 8 feet tall and was very still and well camouflaged. He was like a black, dark gray color, fully covered in hair. We had several minutes of uninterrupted eye contact until he looked up to the direction that would have been slightly to his left. I wiped my eyes and audibly asked, "What does that mean? What are you telling me?" He looked down at me again and raised his arm to point in that same direction. I looked to where he pointed and asked out loud if that's where home was. But when I looked back to where he was standing, he was just gone. I walked that way anyways and found my cabin right before it got dark. My parents were distraught, of course, but happy to see me. I had told them what happened, and to this day I don't think they believed me. I buried this for a long time until I started listening to other stories here. It brought it all back with such ferocity that I had to share. Thank you for taking the time to read this, and I appreciate any input as to why this creature may have helped me. Thanks in advance. Signed, Kathy. And there it is. All I have for you tonight. 3 true Bigfoot encounter stories that are a little different than the usual fare. What do you think about these? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, if you've had an unexplained encounter of your own and would like to share it, just type it up and send it to the email in the description. Your story just might make it into a future video. So thanks again for watching, and until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.